For those of you that are watching the recording or watching live, we had technical difficulties here, but easily handled. So we are up to John chapter 6. Now, we humans have an interesting relationship with numbers. We have an aversion to some like 13 or 666, and an affinity for others like 3 or 7 or 12. Some of you have favorites because, that was the number on your jersey, perhaps. Our youngest son liked 25 because that was a number on his jersey. He also was rather fond of 11 because he was born on 11/11. In the 1960s, country singer Bobby Bare sang about being 500 miles away from home. And in the 1980s, the Proclaimers vowed to walk 500 miles and then walk another 500 miles just to be with the one they loved. In the 1990s, a group hoping to make an impact on American society organized what they called the Million Man March. Most people believe that they fell far short of their goal, but calling it the 479,000 Man March just doesn't have the same ring. In the early 2000s, another group copied that idea and formed the Million Mom March. They got closer to the mark, but they also fell short of 1 million. In our text today, the numbers given for the gathering were not overstated like the million marches were. To our modern way of looking at things, the numbers on the hillside that day were drastically understated. In most of our Bibles, the text that we are looking at today is called the Feeding of the 5,000. But this title is not part of the text of the Bible, and it's somewhat misleading. All 4 Gospels agree that there were 5,000 men. John tells us that there was at least one boy present, the only person in the whole crowd that thought ahead and brought a lunch. Matthew tells us that there were women and children in the crowd that day too. In the first century, apparently, it was only important to know the number of men. But for us to understand the magnitude of the miracle that we're looking at today, it's helpful for us to consider how many people were likely in attendance. If we consider the number 5,000 as referring to families, and think of a family as one man, one woman, and one child, pretty simple family there, then we arrive at a crowd size of 15,000. Now, of course, some of the men there would be alone, and some families would have more than one child with them. But you get the idea. There were way more than 5,000 mouths to feed that day. As a whole, the day had been exhausting. It started with the news that John the Baptist had been killed by King Herod. Matthew tells us that when Jesus heard about John, he took a boat and headed to a place of seclusion. He had a desire for some solitude. Those of you who've gone through a grieving process because you lost somebody that mattered to you understand this. He wanted some time to grieve and to contemplate the future. What would the future be like without John the Baptist? Let us now pick up with John's account in verse 1 of John chapter 6. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd was following him because they were watching the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. But Jesus went up on a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Matthew supplies the additional detail that when Jesus came ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them. And he healed their sick. Often we read about Jesus seeking out times away from the commotion that followed him wherever he went. He was a celebrity. People followed him. Now, if Jesus needed some quiet time, you and I probably need it too. time away from our phones or TVs or computers. Time to simply be alone with God. Telling him our concerns, even though he already knows about them. And more importantly, listening to him. We hear God best when our attention isn't divided. In his sadness over John's death, Jesus sought solitude. But the crowds followed him, and because of his compassion, he healed their sick and then sat down on a mountainside to teach. His grief would have to wait. Some of us understand that. There's so many things that have to be done that grieving has to be put on hold for a moment. Jesus climbed up where he could see everyone, and his voice would carry to such a large group. Now, verse 4, now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Why did John bother to add this statement parenthetically at this juncture? I read a number of commentaries trying to figure out that question, and the commentaries don't have much to say about this. I think John may have written this to let us know that this stressful day was the beginning of Jesus' final year of ministry. Verse 5, so Jesus, after raising his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? But he was saying this only to test him, for he himself knew what he intended to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not enough for each to receive just a little. A denarius was a standard day's wages for a laborer. Philip said 200 days' wages wouldn't even pay for an appetizer for everyone in this crowd. There's no way that Judas had enough money in the treasury to buy supper for that many people. He wouldn't even be able to carry the money bag if they had enough money for that group. Have any of you been to one of those restaurants that is called a family-style restaurant? I don't know if they even exist anymore. I remember when I was a youth, we went to one that was called the Hungry Farmer in Denver. And there was about a dozen family members sitting around the table, and empty plates were set in front of us, and they'd bring out platters of food. At the Hungry Farmer, one of their customs was to bring out the soup in a galvanized pail with a dipper in it. This galvanized pail would be set in the middle with a dipper, and you dip out however much soup you want, and they bring out these big platters of food. Well, our 12 family members wiped that table clean. We ate it all. And that was way more than what that boy had on that day. The Cheyenne Frontier Days pancake breakfast serves a similar number of people as were on that hillside that day when they have the large crowds. But they do it with an army of cooks, servers, and power tools, and they use hundreds of pounds of butter and hundreds of gallons of syrup. The disciples had none of those things. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what's that for so many people? Now, these loaves were not what we think of as loaves. They were more like dinner rolls. Now, would 5 dinner rolls feed the crowd that's in this room today? No. One of the more common types of fish in the Sea of Galilee, you've heard the name, is a kind of tilapia. But they're not all that big. You smoke a couple of fish and add in 5 rolls, and I don't think we could feed the 3 young men in this room satisfactorily. They'd get a taste, but they wouldn't be satisfied when they walked out of here. Now, clearly that fish would have been smoked or dried. Raw fish sitting out all day in the sun would not be very appetizing. I've seen movies made of this event or TV shows made of this event, and they had this tendency to show raw fish. I said, okay, no, that didn't feed these folks. It had to have been smoked or dried, one of the two. Well, Jesus said, have the people sit down to eat. Really? You've got 2 fish and 5 rolls. Now, there was plenty of grass in the place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Now, do you grasp the audacity of the situation? Jesus intended to satisfy 15,000 souls with one boy's lunch. 5 rolls and 2 smoked fish were barely enough to satisfy the appetite of one teenage boy. How could it possibly feed 15,000 people? We don't talk often about how the boy felt about giving up his lunch. He was the only person who had enough forethought to bring food, and it clearly was far from enough to make a difference in such a crowd. And here's the disciples saying, Jesus would like your lunch. But he willingly gave it. Was he hesitant to give up his food? Do you sometimes wonder if what you have to offer God would make any difference at all in the world? 5 rolls and 2 fishes wasn't much. But verse 6 tells us Jesus had a plan. He already knew what he was going to do. Well, verse 11, Jesus then took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he distributed them to those who were reclining. Likewise also the fish, as much as they wanted. Luke adds the detail that after giving God thanks for the food, he broke the rolls and fish into pieces, and then he gave them to his disciples for distribution. Isaac Newton said, "It is the perfection of God's works that they are all done with the greatest of simplicity. What simple actions and such profound effects." Jesus gave thanks, broke the rolls of fish into pieces, and fed thousands. He had instructed the people to sit in groups of approximately 50, meaning that each disciple would be responsible to deliver food to 25 groups. I've often tried to imagine how this miracle of multiplication might have looked. Did it happen as Jesus broke the pieces, or as the people took their share from the basket? I tend to think it's the latter, for that was the same type of miracle that happened in Elijah's day, when the widow was asked to provide for Elijah with just a handful of flour and a teacup of oil. But every time she dipped into the jars, there was enough for what was needed. It wasn't sitting there in great big piles in storehouses. It was as she needed it. And so I think that this perhaps was how it happened. But no matter how it happened, there was enough. Each disciple was able to take a small basket to a group, with each person removing as much as they wanted, and there was always more for the next person, and more for the next group. And when they had eaten their fill, verse 12 tells us, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the leftover pieces so that nothing will be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the pieces from the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. After all 15,000 people had as much as they felt like, Jesus instructed his disciples to gather all the leftovers, and all 12 baskets were still full. Jesus took a single sack lunch and fed thousands, and had enough left over to give each of his disciples a full basket of food. The boy's lunch not only fed the entire crowd, there were 12 times as much left over as what was initially given. Don't think that what you have to offer God is too little to make a difference. He can take whatever you give and multiply the effect beyond all human imagination. Philip had protested that 200 days' wages would be insufficient to give everyone a taste. Jesus provided enough to satisfy the entire crowd. Our God has no lack of resources. My wife and I recently went on a retreat for pastors and their wives. Thank you for letting us do that. It was a wonderful time over there in Afton. One of the speakers of that event, Pastor Jim Law, told of a time when, after giving his tithe to his local church, he had no money left for food. That was something that caused him much internal conflict. As a man, he knew and felt the responsibility to provide for his family. But when they had first married, he and his wife had agreed that God always comes first. And so they put their money in the offering plate, knowing there'd be nothing left. The next morning, he received a call from a man who identified himself as a captain of a Coast Guard ship that had inexplicably run aground just outside of the area where they were. The captain asked if Pastor Law could come and take the ship's food so it wouldn't spoil while repairs were being made to the boat. Pastor Law said that food fed his family for several months. He had no idea why the captain called him rather than someone else, except for the working of God. In the Psalms, God declares, "Every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine and its fullness." Remember what John told us about Jesus back in chapter 1. All things were made through him, and without him, nothing was made that was made. Everything that exists was created by our Lord. He has no problem supplying our daily needs. Therefore, I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are not you of more value than they? One of the hardest lessons for us to learn is to trust God for the everyday things that we need. When we're young, we expect our folks will feed us. Our main question is not, will we eat, but what will we eat? We expect that our parents will take care of the things like providing food and clothing. At times, if we're disobedient, we might be sent to bed without supper. But even then, we understand that our parents will provide the things that we need. Why is it that we think that God is a worse parent than our mother or father? Somehow, as we age, we lose that sense of trust that our future will be provided for. We seem to think it's all on us. Our text teaches that even when we can't see how things can possibly have a good outcome, God is still in control. And he can supply all of our needs according to his riches in glory. Verse 15. So Jesus, aware that they intended to come and take him by force and make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. He finally got that alone time. Jesus had come the first time as a prophet, as a priest, and a sacrifice. The time for the throne was for a future time. That time seems very near now. Well, we've kept the message a little short because we have the joy of having a baptism. I invite you all now to stand as we sing a hymn of invitation while we give Jackson the chance to go get ready for the baptism.